BCAN Presents is brought to you by Unison Health and the Mental Health and Recovery Services Board of Lucas County, reminding you that it's your time, your choice.
By their performances and proud of their efforts. Before we begin, I would like to remind you to silence your cell phones and electronic devices in order to eliminate distractions from our performers. Thank you. All right, this first group performing tonight is the Northview Concert Band, under the direction of Nathan Heath and Carter Adams, with a little fill-in from Heath Gross. They will open tonight's program with a piece by Randall Stanridge that takes the listener through the imaginary trip through the amazing markets of the Middle East, entitled Bazaar. Concert Band's number two and final piece of their portion of tonight's performance is an exciting and traditional band piece titled The Mighty Might March by Ted Mason and arranged by Sean O'Longland. Please welcome to the stage the Northview Concert Band.
This intermission message is brought to you by Unison Health and the Mental Health and Recovery Services Board of Lucas County. Young people who participate in meaningful activities are less likely to use drugs or alcohol, reminding you that it's your time, your choice.
All right, let's give it up for the North covers. That was really good. Very good. Very, very good. All right, next on the program is the Northview Concert Orchestra under the direction of Miss Anna Davis. They open their program with a piece by Alan Lee Silva titled Western Dawn. This piece paints a portrait of Americana using melody voicing similar to that of the composer, Aaron Copland. This fun piece creates a musical picture by depicting the sound of a little western town waking up. For their second piece, the concert orchestra will perform Coiled by Bob Lipton. This energetic piece is based on the style of Portuguese fado music, which is a style of folk music which usually depicts images of the sea or the harsh realities of everyday life. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Northview Concert Orchestra and their conductor, Miss Anna Davis. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was our Jazz Cats. I felt like I had to do that. All right. The next ensemble to perform this evening is the Northview Symphonic Band. The Symphonic Band will open with an Eid Huckabee composition titled Joy and Winds. This exciting overture for wind band has quickly become a staple among standard adjudicated band selections. As this piece challenges students' musical range and is exciting to listen to and perform. To conclude their portion of the concert, the Symphonic Band will perform the Sousa Scramble, arranged by Paul Murtha. This fun, almost joy-like piece creates a mashup of 7 of John Philip Sousa's famous marches into a piece that you will have tapping or marching your feet in your seats. Under the direction of Mr. Carter Adams, Nathan Heath, and Eve Gross, please welcome to the stage the Northview Symphonic Band. Jazz Cats to Jazz Band. All right, we have it going here. All right, next up, the Northview Academy Orchestra is finalizing their backstage setup and getting ready as our next performing group, Carpathia, is the opening selection for our next performing group. William Owens created this composition to depict the daring story of the RMS Carpathia. For those who may not know, the Carpathia is the first ship that heard the distress calls from the sinking Titanic and came to the rescue of the 706 people from the frigid waters. It's kind of cold outside right now, so only med. All right. In this piece, you will hear the dramatic sounds of the ship's boiler room come through quickly to go into a tranquil, peaceful sound. Right before it intensifies again as a picture of the Carpathia attempting to get itself back to safety from the dangerous waters. For the Academy Orchestra's final selection, they perform an arrangement by Carrie Lane Grusso of the ever so famous Rossini Barber of Seville, first performed in Rome in 1860. This famous overture has become one of Rossini's most famous works. Please give a warm welcome to the Academy Orchestra. I couldn't even find my words. That was awesome. That was the string quartet. I felt like I was, I don't know, like in a far off land, just listening and taking it all in. That was awesome. So Northview's string quartet. All right, next to continue the sound of December is Northview's wind ensemble. And they will perform Robert W. Smith's setting of the second movement of the Vaughan Williams Suite. What has now become standard literature for collegiate and professional wind bands. The second movement, entitled Green Sleeves, they might start it, I don't know. A Fantasia for band, takes a unique and whimsical take on the famous folk melody. Wind ensemble will then conclude with a British military march with an interesting past. The Bad Major by Kenneth J. Alford was written to depict a past in review of the military guard. However, Kenneth J. Alford was not the composer's real name. Major Fred Ricketts was his actual name. He lived a double life as a musician. I cannot English today. One of the British bandmasters. I used to teach math, so English is not it. So besides that, writing more traditional works, and one of Kenneth J. Alford, experimenting with more contemporary compositions or even humorous marches, which to this day, his alias marches are more widely known and performed. Please welcome to the stage the Northview Wind Ensemble under the direction of Mr. Nathan Heath, Carter Adams, and Eve Gross.
I'm going to go off script here while they're getting switched over, because some of you might notice that as Miss Eitzen was announcing, and by the way, thank you to Miss Eitzen for announcing for us. Can we give her a round of applause? Thank you so much. You'll notice that she would say, under the direction of Mr. Heath, Mr. Adams, and Ms. Gross. First of all, for those of you who don't know Eve Gross, she's a former student of ours, went to BGSU for music ed, and she's full-time subbing for us now. And the reason Mr. Adams is not here, because yesterday at 3:46, I hope I said that correct, Clara Adams was brought into this board. So Mr. Adams sent his well wishes. He even was like, "Oh, maybe I'll just conduct the piece." I said, "No. You'd be in big trouble." All right, so yeah, so we're happy for them, and they're safe and sound. So that's wonderful news. And Ms. Gross is going to be with us until Mr. Adams is back with us full time, and we're happy to have her here. So without further ado, this is the Wind Ensemble's final portion. You're going to like this. Is a really fun march. A British march, which is slower than an American march and much more like pomp and circumstance, the Mad Major March. Enjoy.
This intermission message is brought to you by Unison Health and the Mental Health and Recovery Services Board of Lucas County. Young people who participate in meaningful activities are less likely to use drugs or alcohol. Reminding you that it's your time, your choice.
Everybody take out their program. No, you did not win anything, but I would like to acknowledge all of the band and orchestra patrons, okay? So the whole note, half note, quarter notes, eighth notes, all of the patrons, sorry. And you'll also see in the insert all of the businesses that have contributed to Northview Band and Orchestra. Thank you very much for that. Also, remember, you can donate, and on the very last page it talks about Kroger Rewards. Remember, this will let you know how to sign up for that. And the Amazon Smile program. Both of those programs help support Northview's Band and Orchestra. Now I'd like to introduce Inga Holton, Band Orchestra President.
I want to share a little bit about myself. I'm a music kid, I was a band kid, and to say that I'm excited that my kids have been so involved in performing arts at Northview would be an understatement. We are so lucky here, and we're lucky in Sylvania for the support that we get from our administration, from Dr. Motley, and throughout that higher level administration, and at our district level from Mr. Mark Pugh and all of the administration here at Northview. And that support means so much. It means that we can put on wonderful programs like this. I'd also like to give a special shout out to our custodians. That may not sound like a big deal, but let me tell you, Mr. Mike, he's the one that usually is cleaning up after our band on Friday nights during marching season. They work so hard, and we are so, so grateful to them. So if you ever see any of the custodians around the building, please tell them thank you. Please help me give a round of applause to our fantastic directors, Mr. Nathan Heath, Mrs. Anna Davis, and the newest member of Parenthood, Mr. Carter Adams. I also want to thank Mr. Woe and Mr. Davis, who are also part of the performing arts teaching, directing team here at this end of the building. They do a lot. Mr. Woe's back there running sound for this tonight, and Mr. Davis has been helping with a lot of the things for this concert too. I would also like to give a thank you to everybody who has helped in any way to support our instrumental program this year, starting with our picnic before school started, concessions, chaperoning, donating water and snacks. These kids like to eat and drink a lot of stuff during this whole season. To everybody who helped with pit crew. We could not make any of this happen without all your help, so thank you, thank you. And I want to give some specific thank yous to some key people. Number one, Mr. Jason Burnett. He's the treasurer for our band and orchestra boosters. Jason puts in many, many hours making sure that we have everything covered. Chantel Bowden, who's our secretary. Sharon and Stefan Thomas, who stepped up to run our concessions this year. The amount of time and thought that they put into running our concessions, I am so grateful to everything that they did. Mike Holton, who ran our tag day this year. Dan and Amy Call, who ran our car wash. Jessica Robinson, who is our volunteer coordinator. So if you've noticed you've been getting emails from Jessica and you're like, I don't know who that person is, you want to open that. There's a sign of genius attached to it, and when she sends you a message, there's something that we need help with. For example, she just sent a message out yesterday. Any of you who have students that may be participating in the Disney trip, there's some key things that we need. Supplies for our buses, and we want to make sure we have them. Hopefully we don't need them, but in case we do, then we've got them. So go on there, pick one thing, and bring it in so that we can make sure we have what we need covered. Nicole Osmus and Julia Strowski, who both have helped with the uniforms. The amount of time that it takes to fit and maintain our uniforms is a lot. So thank you so much to both of you. Laura Humphrey, who ran our pit crew for marching season. Steve Ursel, who runs our website and takes lots of photos. Currently, he's filming this concert so we can put it on our website. Our trailer drivers this year, Paul Hamill and Eric Upchurch, thank you very much. The amount of time that you give making sure that the supplies that we need end up where they're supposed to be. Our fundraising team, who worked countless hours making sure that all the sponsors that were referred to in your program, Lisa Heath, Kelly Sparka, Tammy Eisenreich, and Sean Murphy. And a big thank you again to anybody who's provided financial support this year, from our patron donors to attending our meal nights. Thank you. And so, If you have not yet helped with your time, with your resources, in some way, I have good news. We actually still have opportunities this school year. We'll be hosting Jazz Fest later this year, and we're going to have concession help that we're going to need for that. So keep your eyes and ears open. When Jessica sends that email out saying that we need help, please give an hour, give 2 hours. We would be so appreciative of that. After spring break, there will be a raffle fundraiser that we're doing. Even if you can sell 1 or 2 tickets, we would greatly appreciate that. In May, assuming that the weather is in our favor, we will be having our spring car wash. And then the last thing, last year for the first time we participated in Jute Mode's Here for Good program. They do t-shirts and sweatshirts that support various philanthropic groups in our area. And our performing arts banded together. We raised $800 that's going into a fund that we're using to help our Performing Arts Center. And I've got good news, we are planning to replace our soundboard. And that is a big purchase. It's $15,000 to $20,000. So, later this year, when you see that come out, that the t-shirts and sweatshirts to support our Performing Arts Center are available, please buy one or buy 2. We were able to raise $800 last year. I'd like to see even more because we'd like to fill up that coffer and ideally be able to replace that soundboard going into next year. So, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the concert.
And I forgot to give Sam a shout out for that amazing piano playing. That's what I wish I could play the piano like. I ended at Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, but that's what I was hoping for at some point. It was an awesome job by him. All right, now, we'd like to take this opportunity to thank you all in attendance tonight, as well as we appreciate your support. The final group to perform this evening is the Northview Chamber Orchestra and Symphony Orchestra. The Symphony Orchestra is comprised of our chamber orchestra students, plus wind and percussion students from the Northview Wind Ensemble. This evening, the orchestra will perform an exciting overture of Richard Meyer entitled Emerald Falcon. Meant to represent a classic superhero, this piece is written in a style of the end credits of an exciting movie. Then the Symphony Orchestra performs Finlandia by Sean Sibelius. This famous 1899 tone poem represents the spirit of the Finnish people's fight for independence from what was then the Russian Empire. Please welcome back to the stage Miss Anna Davis and the Northview Symphony Orchestra.
everybody. Just a quick little, our entire instrumental music department would love to thank you for coming this evening. Thank you for sharing your children with us and allowing them to do something truly special. These performances are remarkable, the way they uplift our school, community, and allow our students to absolutely shine. Wouldn't you agree? We absolutely could not do this without your support, so thank you, parents and families, for all that you are giving and supporting your students. We love them. Thank you. We're so fortunate to have the overwhelming support of our Sylvania administration, our Board of Education, Northview administration, and faculty. We'd like to thank them as well for their continued support. Tonight, we were blessed with the talents of Miss Eitzen as our announcer. Miss Eitzen, wherever you are, we'd like to thank you for taking the time to be with us and for emceeing for us tonight. Let's give Miss Eitzen a huge round of applause. Job well done as a voice of our Northview instrumental ensembles. Finally, we'd like to wish you all a happy and fun-filled holiday season, drama-free. May your moments over the next few weeks with your family and friends create special, cherished memories of a lifetime. The Northview Symphony Orchestra will now conclude tonight's performance with a long-standing Northview tradition, Leroy Anderson's timeless classic, Sleigh Ride. Enjoy.
We hope you enjoyed this performance of BCAN Presents, brought to you by Unison Health and the Mental Health and Recovery Services Board of Lucas County.